Alright, what up guys? It's me, and welcome to a new series. This is Squid Game in Unity, where I'm going to be making the games from the hit TV show Squid Game from Netflix, which if you don't know what that is, it's a show made by Netflix in 2021, where contestants compete in a series of games for big money and a big grand prize. So, the game that we're... I believe. I might be mispronouncing that. But essentially the rules are each player has a folded square piece of paper. Once one player's Ddjaki is on the ground, their competitor must throw theirs in it at an attempt to flip the opposing piece of paper. If the paper flips, they win. If it doesn't, they lose. Just a warning, this is for fun. I'm not publishing this anywhere. Please don't come at me, Netflix. I just thought it would be really cool to explore some of the logic between these games and have some fun with game development and make a fun series out of it. So the way this is going to go is I'm going to make a rough draft of the game and then demo it, talk about some of the logic, and then I'll go through and pretty it up with like better graphics, better models, things like that. So without further ado, let's get into the rough draft of making the game. So here I have my Unity. Don't worry about what I was doing before. I was trying to make sure I pronounced it correctly. And if I hit play, we have a level screen with the 12 games between Squid Game Season 1 and 2 that I'm going to be creating. So to start, we're going to go into Ddjaki, and I will see you guys once I have a rough draft. Alright guys, so what you just saw was the time-lapse of me creating the really rough version of this game. So what I'm going to do now is show you guys the rough version of this game and sort of walk through how it works. So we are back in Unity, and here's what I have so far. This is a very, very rough version of the game. Now if you guys remember, the rules of this game were pretty simple. The rules were each player has a folded square piece of paper, which, as you can see, there's both a red and a blue piece of paper. This tracks with Squid Game TV show as well. They were using red and blue. It's not the exact same shades, but I can go back and fix that in what's going to be the next part. Once one player's piece of paper is on the ground, their competitor must throw it at theirs in an attempt to flip the opposing piece of paper. So what I did here was, because I don't have this as a two-player game, and I very much could, but right now I only have it as a one-player game. This is designed to just be like for fun, and it's a little bit more work to make it a two-player game, but it's also, because it's on one device, is a lot of logic, and I thought it would be easier and just a little more fun if I made it a one-player game, because a lot of these are one-player games. Some of them are two-player games, but for the most part, they're one-player games, and this can be played as one player if you're basically just playing against an AI. So, as you can see, there's 2 pieces of paper, and then if the paper flips, they win. If it doesn't flip, they lose. So as you can see, that time I would have won. And then that time I would have lost, because the red piece of paper didn't flip. So it is a very, very simple version of this game. Let me walk you guys through how I did this. So I have 2 scripts. The first is for the blue, which is what you as the player are playing as. The first is for the blue, and essentially, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Hang on, a little bit of a technical difficulty here. Give me a second. Okay, it turns out I had it right before, but that's fine. So walking through, essentially I have 2 components here, or 2 variables here. The first being a transform called player Ddjaki, which is essentially the cube that I'm attempting to add velocity to, and it's the blue cube. It's the one that the player is playing as. And then next I have just a rigid body, which I'll define that in a bit, but that's essentially the rigid body of the blue cube. Then I have a force, so that is the force that is being applied, or that is the magnitude of the force that is being applied to this blue cube. And then here I just have a vector 3 called mouse position, because I'm getting the mouse position. I do nothing in the start function, but the update function is where this happens. So to start, I probably could have formatted this a little better. Let me fix my errors. Perfect. Within the update function, I have an if loop, and the condition for the if loop is if get mouse button down 0, which is essentially, if I pull my mouse here, it is the left mouse button. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it is that button. So when that button is pressed, I then create a ray, which, for those who don't know what a raycast is, it has to deal with raycasting. It's essentially a line from where the mouse click was on the screen to the 3D world that we're working in. And then from that ray, I can define a raycast hit, which is an event, which is when that raycast hits something. So when it hits the red cube, we then have this function, which the condition for that is it must see something. So then the vector 3 of direction is the point of the hit minus the difference of, or minus the position that the cube is currently at. And then it normalizes it to make it a vector 3 that we can use in our code. Next, I set the velocity of the rigid body of the blue cube, which is right here, to the direction, and then I multiply it by the force, because it takes a lot of force to move this thing, and it's a pretty, that difference is a pretty slow direction. And then after that, I just debug. I just print to the console the hit position, which is the hit point, and then the direction. So that is the code for the blue cube. So, and you guys will see it when I hit play in a second. It's looking, if I hit just in this white space right here, nothing, but as soon as I hit on the red cube, it hits. And it moves towards the cube from wherever it is. And now we're into the script for the red cube. So the red cube First thing I do is I define a boolean called should rotate. A boolean is just a true or false value, which means at any point in the program it is either true or false, and it is great for doing conditional things, which I very, very much use in a second. So in the update function, I have if should rotate, so that's essentially saying if the boolean is true, then it does the following, and that is where I have it rotate towards the position of 180 degrees, so that's just flipping it over for the x position, and then time.delta time times 150 is the speed. Time.delta time is essentially each second per frame, and it is a very slow movement if you don't multiply it by a fair amount, because that means it is for 60 frames a second, it's around 0.016 rotations per second. And trying to get to 180 of those takes forever. And then I also just have another logic loop right here that says when it reaches 180, or negative 180, then should rotate is equal to false, which tells it to stop rotating. And the last little bit of code I have here is on a function called onTriggerEnter. So for those who don't know, in Unity we have things called box colliders, like you can see right here. And that collider, and it's not just a box collider, there's circle colliders, mesh colliders. A collider essentially means that, and if I zoom in, that's not what I meant to do. If I zoom in here and go to Edit Collider, you see these lines, and these lines are for the collider. Which means it takes note when something collides with it. Sometimes the collider can just have it bounce off, but I have this one set to be a trigger. And when it's set to be a trigger, that means the object just goes straight through it, it passes through like there's no collision there. But then you can do cool things like define a function called onTriggerEnter, and then you have to define a collider other because it's colliding with something. And essentially this is when the blue cube hits the red cube, it triggers this function. So I'm getting the rigid body component, and a rigid body in a simple way is the physics object that makes the objects in Unity move. So that blue cube has a rigid body object on it. The next thing I do is I define an integer called rotate, and I have random.range with the lower bound being 0 and the upper bound being 2. Now the important thing to note here is that the upper bound is not included, which means that is giving me it's a random chance that it's 0 or 1. And I'm just printing that to the log for my sake, for being able to test the game. And then here I have if rotate is equal to 1, then should rotate equals true, which then triggers this, and then that triggers that. So that is the basics of how this game works. What's going to happen in the next part of the video is I'm going to go through and essentially make it a playable game, because right now it's two cubes colliding and it looks cool, but it's not playable. If I want to play again, I have to do some funky things with the collisions, or I have to just start the game over. It doesn't rotate that well, it doesn't move that well, the red cube starts there and the opposing player is supposed to throw it down. I need to make something to define the rules. So I'm going to do that in the next part of this video, and then I'll come back when it is a finished game. Alright, what up guys? So I've gone through and essentially cleaned up the game a little bit, made it so that some of the animations are smoother, there's a little bit of a background. Admittedly, it's a lazy background, but the entire point of this is to play the game, not to have it look amazing. I just needed it to look better than it did and have a little bit more functionality and make it an actual game versus what it was. So let's head over to Unity and I'll show the finished product and explain a little bit. So, back over in Unity, essentially, like I said, the train station background, because in the show this game took place in a train station. The train station background, I'm well aware, is lazy, but at the same time, it's supposed to be pointing at the ground. So, I'm not entirely sure how I would have done that and made it not look weird, so I think it was just going to look weird anyway. But essentially, now when you hit play, there's a screen that comes up for the rules. I explained them at the beginning of this video, but to be fair, just in the event that someone is playing this, and it makes it feel more like an actual game. There's a there's a text panel explaining the rules. You hit play, the red square drops down, because again, in the actual game, the other player throws it down, but I'm making most of these a single-player game. And then you click on it, then if you lose, there's that, and there's a play again button. And then we'll see if I can get it to where you win. If you win, it flips up like that, and then there's a message that says you win, and there's a play again. I don't know how clear it is to see, because my capture card was $30 and it gets the job done, but that means it is a little bit lower quality. But I did change the model out. It's not just a flat cube, it is the actual like folded paper model. So yeah, so that concludes the first game. Oh, and there's also a back arrow to get to the level screen. So we still have a bunch more games to go, but guys, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment, subscribe, like, do all those things, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.